Radio. I'm Jim. This show is called Wishing Well, and so this is the fourth. It's the fourth episode, and so we had a speculative fiction writer, Thaddeus Howes, was on last week. Week before that, we had DJ Snuff talking about sort of holistic medicine, naturopathic stuff, and so we're going to have hopefully a different writer, artist every month. We're going to have different health professionals bringing in different perspectives, and I also want to bring on a different composer every month, or a different musician of contemporary classical music. Well, not just contemporary classical music, different kinds of music. But I think contemporary classical is pretty good in relation, and like ambient music's pretty good in relation to mental health, because it's it's accessible, sort of relaxing music. So today I done an interview with the Scottish composer Alistair White, who's a kind of composer of sort of primarily operas. He's also a PhD student at Goldsmiths. We had a really interesting conversation, a very long, interesting conversation. It was great. We just kept talking and talking, and so I'm really happy to show you that interview. To start with, I'm going to play some Janacek. I'm going to play Janacek's. So Janacek was a Czech composer, and I'm going to play his Sinfonietta with the great conductor Simon Rattle. Brilliant. Brilliant, 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 brilliant stuff. Janacek's probably, yeah, he's definitely my favourite classical composer. Um, and then next, I'm going to play the British composer, famous British composer, Benjamin Britten. I mean, this piece is very much related to mental health. It's an opera called Peter Grimes. I'm also playing it for Alistair, who I'm going to play the interview that I did with him a bit later. Yeah, because it's sort of explores themes of the opera very heavily explores the themes of mental health. It's very dark. It's very very interesting piece about a fisherman. Yeah, and yeah, it's a very dark piece. Yeah, so I'm gonna play. But it kind of it really interestingly definitely explores the themes of how someone's mental health condition is made worse by the society around them, I would say. So this is an interlude, one of the interludes from Peter Grimes, and it's called Evening, Interlude Evening from Peter Grimes. Okay, that's great. Um, and now we're gonna play Leonard Bernstein. Some of you may be familiar with him because of the musical West Side Story. Because of the musical West Side Story. Sorry, someone's trying to call me. Because of the musical West Side Story. But he did a great lecture series on music. And I'm very interested in this linguist called Noam Chomsky, who talks about this idea of hereditary language, the idea that the format for learning language is innate in humans, so we're going to talk about Bernstein, talking about Chomsky's theories in relation to music, musical thinking.
The notion of a worldwide inborn musical grammar has haunted me, but I would never have dreamed of basing a lecture series on a notion so ill-defined and apparently non-verifiable if it were not for the extraordinary materials that have appeared in recent years on the similar idea of a universal grammar underlying human speech. I've been profoundly impressed and encouraged by the burgeoning of thought in this relatively new linguistic area, an area that might be called Chomskyan. By so naming it, I don't mean to restrict my observations to Noam Chomsky's work alone. It's a term of convenience, since he is the best known, most revolutionary, and best publicized name in that area. Along with his colleagues and disciples, many of whom are now in radical disagreement with him, he has produced a body of work that has reinvigorated linguistics to a point where it seems new light may be shed on the nature and structural functions of that elusive thing called mind. In other words, by studying in depth why we talk the way we do, by abstracting the logical principles of language, we may be in a position to discover how we communicate in a larger sense, through music, through the arts in general, and ultimately, through all our societal behavior. We may even discover how we are mentally constituted, because language is species-specific. That is, it's common to all of us who belong to the human species, and only to us. Of course, tomorrow morning, cheerful new facts about dolphins or a certain chimpanzee named Sarah may throw a monkey wrench into the works, but meanwhile, this philosophical science called linguistics seems to have become our newest key to self-discovery. With each passing year, it seems to substantiate ever more convincingly the hypothesis of innate grammatical competence, as Chomsky calls it, genetically endowed language faculty, which is universal. It's a human endowment. It proclaims the autonomy of the human spirit.
So it's interesting, isn't it, that, Bernstein is talking about this idea of language being innate, and then he goes on, to mention that in relation to music and musical capabilities. So that's very fascinating. And now we're going to be playing some Morton Feldman. No, we're not. No, we're not doing that just yet. Sorry. Yeah, we're going to be playing some John Cage, 2 pieces for piano. And now, here is my interview, excuse me, with Alistair White, the composer.
In love with the form.
Oh, no, we want it to start from the beginning. It's just... Hi, Alistair. Thanks for agreeing to interview with me.
Hi, Jim. How are you doing? Lovely.
I'm really good, thanks. How are you doing today?
Yeah, very well, very well.
Very good.
Yeah, good.
So, Alistair, tell us about yourself and what you do. You're a composer.
Yeah, I'm a composer of, I suppose, what you might call contemporary music. I'm most interested at the moment in writing operas. I'm just absolutely in love with the form and the fact that you can blend it with storytelling and the fact that you can work with other art forms and that you get to and that you get to be working in theaters, or at least you used to until recently, but hopefully we get back in them soon. There's a real magic about working in the even when you're composing, you feel as though you're in the dusty backstage of a theater, and it just makes the experience. Sure. It somehow brings these abstract technical processes to life in a way that perhaps maybe, at least to me, chamber music doesn't. And of course, I love stories, and so it's a wonderful thing to do. I was originally, I never trained as a composer originally. It was what I wanted to be when I was a kid was a rock star.
Sure, yeah.
Played in some bands, which was really great fun. And yeah, I suppose I always loved being on stage. Maybe that also has something to do with this love of opera as an art form.
You're not on stage as much now as a composer, I imagine.
Well, no, but that's it, isn't it? But it's, perhaps somehow in opera you feel perhaps more invested in the performativity of it. It's difficult to explain. You feel more like you feel more like the performer part of you is in the music, because you control all these. You can influence these other things, which is wonderful. But and then I suppose I just heard some kind of contemporary music and realized how. I don't know what the word is, how punk it sounded. I was always very interested in music for its political potential to change how you see the world. And I felt more and more like working purely within the limits of what was possible in perhaps like more popular art forms was kind of like politically restricting. And it was only like by broadening the canvas, by learning more techniques and tools and possibilities, that you could really accomplish what I wanted to do. And so I started, we started to learn music, and obviously that in itself brings you on a long journey. And that's how I ended up here. Because I know performativity and performance in everyday life and how that relates to art is also something you're very interested in, isn't it?
Sure, yeah. This idea of like just that idea of performance shouldn't just be excluded to watching things on television or watching things in the theatre, but that the best example I think is fashion. The clothes that we wear, you can say that is sort of a performance. So it's a way to kind of express ourselves, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And that's why, particularly when you engaging music with more, I suppose, more obvious types of performance like theatre is interesting, because you can see its tendrils reaching out into outside the theatre. And also you said fashion. I mean, absolutely. Something I find really interesting is fashion performance, like when fashion becomes a show.
Because some of the work, I mean, at least two, from my knowledge of the work that you've done, have been operas very much about fashion. And the question I want to ask you is, do you think that in a way that the performances you make have a way of bringing these worlds together, or that people who are perhaps in the fashion world are people who are just interested in fashion, who might not necessarily be into contemporary music necessarily, or contemporary classical music necessarily, or people who are in the contemporary classical music world might not necessarily be that much into fashion, but you can kind of bring those two worlds together and kind of broaden and open people's perspective on things, you know, by bringing these different elements together.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in fashion. You're right. The two operas we've done are Wear and Robe. I'm working with, with the collaborator Gemma A. Williams, who directed both of them. She's a fashion writer and curator and director. And to me, it's that. Yeah, I suppose that at the heart of the relationship between fashion and opera is a kind of very interesting paradox. In that, and to me, it's trying to find a new approach to music theatre through that sense of paradox. So that a lot of, I suppose, a lot of kind of, total works of art or collaborations involve this kind of yeah, exactly. It forms this kind of interdisciplinarity when everything turns into, or all the different art forms combine together to become something else. And I suppose in fashion opera, what I was really interested in is trying to create something that was, rather than based upon cohesion, was based upon paradox, and the idea of paradox and non-relation as a form of relationship. So that, I mean, an example, a very banal, simple example of that would be like the idea that you are defined, that what something is defined by what something is not, and so encompasses also what something is not. And so when you try on a practical level, that to me means kind of combining different art forms together, but allowing them to retain their integrity, allowing them to retain their structural, the structural independence, so that you could appreciate the fact, for instance, the fashion in a show remains fashion. It doesn't become costume, because fashion is its own form of art. It doesn't need to be subsumed and to become subservient to music. And same with the text, and same with dance, and same with theatre. So that all of these art forms can kind of move according to their own logics, sometimes completely separately. But at the same time, they are part of a structure, so that they all logically make sense. So they're definitely not an assemblage. They're not a collage. They are part of a meaningful structure, but at the same time, they are entirely independent.
Interesting.
And that comes back to, that's to me what music is. Music is the ability to create, I suppose polyphony is a big part of it. The idea to think separate things simultaneously.
You said something interesting the other day. We were having a conversation, and you said something about getting outside the self and traces of just not you, or within terms of music.
Yeah, what were you talking about? Well, I suppose that's,
or just even in terms of music listening, this idea of like being transported to other places, etc. Terms of music.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. For me, the most interesting, I suppose, for me, the best forms of art or the art form. I shouldn't say the best. The art forms that I love, that are to me the most effective at doing what I think art should do, are these works that don't create perspectives, but that they create worlds with a multitude of conflicting perspectives, paradoxes, and that the music I love is the stuff that kind of erects these. I think, was it Boulez talked about labyrinths, that, and you can, each time you listen to it, you can trace a different path through it. And this gives you an incredible sense of freedom that you don't get, you know, in a lot of other, you don't get really in a lot of stuff under late capitalism, like even in our free time, where like I always seem to move along these very specific train tracks of thought. You know, where we get these, you know, these repetitive synaptic patterns that are controlled by, you know, our relationship with the media, our relationship with culture. But in some works of art, you feel almost what it might be like to be free of that, to be free of being out, to be outside the self, and to be something that was, yeah, I suppose, like that's what subjectivity is, isn't it? You know, freedom, becoming more than what you were, becoming something outside yourself. And so I really love, you know, music like, you know, well, I suppose also it could be, you know, you can see it in all parts of the musical spectrum, and you know, in very complex music, like what we were talking about yesterday, like Brian Ferneyhough, where it's the complexities of the interpretation, and in the music itself presents you with
very complex music.
Yeah, but it presents you with this, you know, endless kind of, it's almost like this great, wonderful, you know, play pit that you can listen to differently each time, that you can move through in a different way. But also at the other end of that, you know, minimalism does a very similar thing, because it puts the onus, and this is again, I think plagiarizing from Ferneyhough, the idea that it puts the onus entirely upon the subject, you know, rather than the object of of the artwork. That because very little is happening, the magic happens in you. You know, that's the you know, that's the difference in, you know, something like and you can, it's the same in the relationship between, like, you know, say a minimalist sculpture and and you know, perhaps like an impressionist painting. It's not that your eye, as the painting moves along all the different little curves of art, and there are lots of different paths to go, paths to take. But in, like, you know, in like a sculpture where the lights are just going on and going off and going on, then that leads you to all forms of reflection. And that emptiness is as much of a freedom as the expansive space.
Absolutely. So like you can like someone like Rothko or something, you know, compared to something that's like a photorealistic painting or something.
Although Rothko's an incredible example. That's a really, because what happens in a Rothko painting, you know, that this is me, you know, going on about what I think happens, blah 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 blah. But then, you know, you think of something like Rothko. What on earth happens when you sit with those paintings and they just, you know, transform before your eyes? Like, you know, that's really just despite everything that I said before, it's something that you can't put into words, you know.
So just to quickly sort of stop there, and then we'll continue with the rest of the interview. Seems like a good place to play Morton Feldman's Rothko Chapel 1, and then we'll resume the interview.
Really, really great art, isn't it? Is that something that happens where suddenly the whole world has changed, you know?
I think there's something very cerebral about this, about this kind of, you know, relating to the brain. I think, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. But also very, you know, vegetable also. You know, there's that thing where something just hits you in the blood, isn't it?
Yes, well, absolutely.
Vegetables don't have blood, so. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I, you know, it's been great, you know, all of the conversations that I've had with you about this, because in terms of the music that I consider to be like serial, we spoke about it yesterday, like serialist music or, you know, atonal music, or complex music. I've had this sort of stereotype, and then I want to kind of, with this question or point, kind of go broader into just that, you know, I've had this stereotype about view of it being for people who have studied music. You know, I've always thought, well, you know, it's music that in a way I think sort of, you know, gets so complicated and so into the theory that, you know, it leaves the audience behind. But then, you know, and then also this kind of view of a lot of people, how they might think, oh, this isn't for me, this is for people who've studied music. But I mean, I think you're great because you're sort of direct evidence against that, you know, just your existence, because you're someone who you know, isn't privately educated, you know, who hasn't had a background in, you know, you weren't given a cello as a toddler, you know, you know, you didn't have that background in music. You've just sort of started with the guitar music, popular music, and then just discovered it for yourself.
Well, it's actually worse than that. I was given great opportunities as a kid, but was just rubbish at them.
Right, okay.
You're absolutely.
Sorry, I'm not trying to portray, like, you know, some sort of like you know, working class hero story.
No, and I'm definitely not working class.
No, I know you're not.
Very much like very, very privileged, very, very lucky.
Yeah.
I can't claim anything like that, and that's. I mean, I think that's also very, like, I was just. It's also why I don't believe in the idea of talent, because I have none. You know, I'm the, you know, epitome of just sucking at picking it up, and it just didn't. I suppose it just didn't make sense to me. But because of the well, yeah, for many, for me, it was always the relationship between what happened on the paper, the relationship between the symbolic and the real, what happened on the paper and what happened in the sound, and the discrepancy. I just couldn't get my head around it. And it was only till later, coming at it from outside, I suppose, outside the grammar of common practice or tonality, that I was able to understand it, because it was much more like a system, and from that then I could understand tonality. It's just, I suppose, I think there should be, I think, yeah. But what was your question was about the, about intellectualism in music. I mean, I don't think it would be I don't think it's a bad thing for there to be some forms of art that are incredibly, Rosicrucian and for, limited audiences. I think there's some stuff I really, don't like, which I actually think is awful, but which have very small groups of absolutely, people who think it's the most wonderful thing in the world. I think that's wonderful. You see it also in fandom. There are very specific forms of fandom, and that's rather from being like some kind of elitist thing. It's actually a wonderful thing. It's a small, small communities. And also, if music wants to just be intellectual, why shouldn't it be? But I think some of the music that I think we're talking about, stuff like the European avant-garde, is, to me, the appeal of it, and I suppose most people who listen to it, the appeal isn't at all the intellectualism, or it's in fact far much less than it would be in something like classical music. Like in Haydn, it matters very much that you understand the structure and what's happening, and even some of it's fundamental to meaning. The techniques and the structures that he's using, whereas in contemporary music, where the piece always creates its own form and does so in a way that's it does so in a way that is often very expressive and dynamic and performative. And I think it's really what you were saying, what you've said before, is it's much more an idea of late capitalist popular culture, that we're told we can only listen to certain things. It's like the new trailer for the Batman comes out, and we all watch it. I couldn't wait to see it, and I watched it, and I ate it up. And, I'm always going to do that, because I don't know, I'm in the system, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily good or that I like it. It's just, or whatever was being produced in that way would become mass culture. It's like is it a tautology? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And the opposite of that isn't just because that's not popular, because it's popular because it's popular, and that doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's just the way it is. And I think we have to undo that dichotomy between there being, that it's somehow less accessible or elitist to not want to feed into the things that what is defined as popular is somehow good. Rather, it's the opposite. Rather, I think it's the opposite way around, and that really, really radical. How would I say it? Really radical, accessible stuff that is for people. For the people, is the stuff is work that is. That challenges and allows this, well, as I said earlier, allows this play for subjective freedom that you don't get in anything else. It's not just that you. Yeah,
it's okay. Thank you. And I mean, you're making some really interesting points. I mean, I think it's interesting, the kind of the assumption, because obviously, as someone, myself, who works in opera and works in a bit of the classical music world, you meet all different kinds of people. I because of the where my dad's from, because of the kind of brass band tradition in Lancashire, in the sort of post mining towns, there's a lot of classical brass players who are from very working class backgrounds, whose family were in trade unions and kind of picketing and all that sort of thing, and but then there's not just brass players from those places as well. But I think that it is, in a lot of ways, can be seen as a kind of middle class sort of world. But I think that's probably more to do with the fact that, you know, I mean, especially today, you know, you've got the Conservatives who are kind of, you know, they're cutting music from state education. They're taking away drama and art, you know, as like classes. So yeah, what do you think about the, you know, these stereotypes about music, or just the fact that, you know, maybe people from certain backgrounds won't feel that it's for them, you know, if they haven't grown up with it?
I mean, I think that that's a lot to do with, I mean, the culture of how it's portrayed by those classes. You know, essentially the class enemy. Let's call it what it is. These, you know, these people want to take. They want to take it, and they want to keep it for themselves. And they do that, you know, in a variety of absolutely horrific ways. Like you say, kind of ensuring that music education isn't something that's available for everyone. Another would be the kind of campaign to de-skill music, that is, you know, like this idea of anti-notation, that somehow you don't need skills to, you don't need that music should be an unskilled. The idea of the relationship between like a lack of skill and authenticity, which was purported by the
right, but they're actually
the right-wing press to try
exactly.
And then also, you know, the other end of that is things like these absolutely, you know, I can't find a word strong enough, but you know, Johnson's pumping of you know, the orchestral classics into tube stations as though it will somehow you know, create peace, or the idea of like piano music as a background. Art is not going to make you a calmer, better person. If anything, it's going to make you as an individual, you know, more of a menace to society.
Wasn't there that train station there was that train station in Germany where they were playing serialist music to stop crime in the station? Did you hear about that?
I mean, that just sounds awful. Like, I mean, but also amazing. Really,
yeah. It's very German.
Yeah, that's the adjective you're looking for. It's neither awful or amazing. It's just definitely better than pumping. You know, like I remember, you know, just like hearing the 1812 wafting up the. It's just like, you know, and then at the same time that feeds into like, you know, like. That feeds also into kind of, I think, especially this country, a real conservatism about music, is that music's something that happened in the past. So sure. we just want to see La Traviata over and over and over again, and we want to see, you know. And don't get me wrong, I love La Traviata. I probably could watch it over and over again. But at the same, do we really have to watch that many?
Carmen. I'm very interested, actually. A thought just pops into my head from what you've said, and it's very fascinating. This idea of music in the background. Now, I want your gut reaction to this, because I think, well, you know, it makes me think of like music and performers in film, because, you know, you had silent film where music was a really big part of it, almost at the forefront of a lot of silent film, you know. I suppose it wasn't so, and then, you know, and then you have kind of, you know, music and film that's just this idea that perhaps music has played a big role in film, but then it sort of plays less of a, it starts to play less of a role, maybe like after the war or as technology increases, which is maybe even why you have more kind of minimalist music, or more music that can more easily fit into the background. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's really interesting. When cinema was, you know, when cinema and cinematic music was, you know, taken off in the golden age, I remember the critic Hans Keller used to really take it seriously and do proper, you know, analysis and criticism of the music, because it's such a wonderful democratic thing, you know, technology, that you don't need to, you know, that it can, that it can, you can take incredible music out to theaters all over the world. It can just be there. It can be an incredible thing. And some of the, you know, cinema is a really magical thing when it works with music at the same time. And it's just, even when you take away text altogether, and it's just, you know, these images bolstered by, I suppose, quite often nowadays, like kind of romantic or minimalist sound world. But even then, when it means something, it's brilliant. Like I just finished. I just watched Jurassic Park again the other day, and that is such a deep film, about the relationship between signification and reality, and the relation, and like our continual what do you call it, unearthing of the past, which comes back to haunt us, and gender and like gender roles, and these are like these really complex ideas are explicated purely through images and hummable romantic, romantic pastiche music, and it's a very, very magical thing when that happens. But when it's certainly become and Jurassic Park is of course part of this. It's a factory production for creating Pavlovian reactions,
right,
to these, the same, the train track that we all want to go along and feel the same thing over and over and over again. And the simplest thing, and the simplest thing for that is arpeggios, because they an arpeggio moving from a chord to its relative minor will always hit you right between the eyes. Why not just use that instead of more complex language?
I love that phrase, Pavlovian reactions. Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine was telling me, that even in adverts, how all music and adverts is all at the same frequency, and I think, he was saying, I don't know if it's true, that we get, you get a dopamine rush from that when you have that, and then even there's so much kind of, I just think that's interesting. That's almost a technique that's kind of possibly even came from like the kind of uniformity of like what's going to work in film, and it's this thing of
Well,
it's quite fascinating.
It's the thing with, I suppose, that it's like a problem in our musical language that we think, and just I suppose our visual language and language more generally, that we think in, we think in romantic music, and we think in realist interactions, and we think in fake realist portrayals in cinema, and that's how we think. And actually, there's a much more diverse language for expressing ourselves. But of course, production lines of late capitalism don't allow for that. It's much better to make things that instantly click. And of course, social media is the greatest example of this. It should be the most wonderful tool for generating, dialectic and proper debate and mutual understanding. But of course, it becomes simply like, it becomes simply a synaptic pattern in our brain that wants to get the tiny little drop of dopamine you get from getting that little red tick at the edge of your profile, and that's those instantaneous things surpass the more difficult paths that would take for dialectical understanding, the proper debate is what I mean. And I suppose that's the thing that feeds into the way that we all think about things. Certainly for myself, that something that's easier to achieve will be automatically somehow better, or more accessible, or more inclusive. But it's not not the case. That, I think, is an ideological sleight of hand, an ideological trick that's being played on us.
But are you by any chance doing a PhD at the moment?
So that's what this is about.
You talk like someone who is.
I'm so sorry.
No, I love it. It's great. What's your PhD in?
Well, the PhD started off about kind of taking I was really interested in new cosmological descriptions of the world, and how these are actually becoming things like some of the impacts of quantum theory we're going to feel on a material basis soon,
Oh, wow.
With the quantum computer. You know, it's gonna change from being this some weird thing that appears in bad sci-fi films to being like an everyday little tool that we use in the just like like in the same way that like the internet and the Matrix has become. Now we're all living in the Matrix, and it's entirely banal. We're on Zoom at the moment, and this is we don't think twice about being represented by virtual avatars that interact with one another. Quantum computer will be the same. It'll change how we think about reality, I think, and by changing the relation, changing the modes of production essentially, and to find out what that might mean for artistic practice. And I suppose that's a lot of, therefore, what I was talking about earlier about the ideas of paradox and I suppose also contingency and trying to find a new language for expressing this, or how you could use that concept, these like what I think will be popular conceptions of reality, trying to preempt those before it happens. So that, and I think as artists, that's what we should, or even if there's a political impetus within working in art, it's to try and preempt what's going to happen in the culture, and try and work there before the military industrial complex gets to it and and transforms it into just transforms it into the gloop of the production line.
Yeah, totally.
If that makes sense. Yeah,
it does. Yeah.
So, yeah. What can I ask? Jim? Put that back to you. What's your feeling on that relationship between, between politics and art in that sense?
In the sense of what?
In that sense of what should I say? The responsibility of the artist when working with, within a particular context. And the relation of that between, do you have any thoughts on that?
The relation between what? Give me a bit clearer. Politics, art and politics, and.
Viewer, sorry, I'm trying to.
It's okay. I just don't want to answer wrong,
I suppose what I was saying was I was giving some thoughts about the the responsibility of the artist.
Yeah, to preempt things before the. Yeah, I guess I kind of. I don't think it. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I mean, if you look at a TV series like Black Mirror, you've got like Charlie Brooker like saying, "Oh, this is where we're going if we're not careful." Well, how do you know that some big entrepreneurs are not going to watch a Charlie Brooker show and go, "Oh, well, yeah, that's a great idea." I'm getting my tech people to work on it right now. So for me, it's almost maybe the other way around, that like a lot of what the powers that be are already doing, people aren't aware of, and that art can make people aware of what's already happening. I mean, like last week from the show, I had a speculative fiction author on, and that's so good. It's so good for that, and the art's so good for doing that, for exploring issues and making people aware of things, but without it coming across as a sort of polemic on one side, because you're using metaphor or analogy.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think that's really interesting, and I think that conversely, the most political form of art is one that contains many different viewpoints within it, and that's why even though a polemicist art can be wonderful, and I think it's a great example of the one I always think of is the Divine Comedy, Dante, where he manages to include all of these different voices who are equally, and it's not just what they say, it's the structure of how they speak. Like when they're speaking, it's like they are the entire world of the artwork, and it manages to contain all these different competing, almost fully contained worlds within its within it as a whole, which is.
So yeah, we'll continue with the interview, just the last bit, and there's probably just like 10 minutes left or something. But in between, I'm just going to play a piece by Penderecki, Divertimento by Penderecki.
you have no idea how it's done. I mean, I know you're also in, obviously Shakespeare is another one who can do this. At the same time, two competing viewpoints from his characters can both, and not just the viewpoints, but the worlds that sustain those viewpoints, including all of the material conditions and the ideological systems. Like, they seem absolutely correct, but they can't both be true. And he does, like, through the power of the way that he expresses, or whoever Shakespeare was expresses it. And to me, that's just that is the most powerful political thing, because that allows you to see, perhaps it gives you some kind of objectivity of your own position within the system, and that helps you at least it might not help you. It might, it helps you. It helps you kind of, it helps you become free. Really, that sounds very cheesy, but that's ultimately what I think that's what that is. That's, real freedom is our subjective freedom.
Very interesting. So let's sort of wrap things up, because I want in the show to have some time to sort of play some great music. But one thing I want to ask you is simple question: just what's your, maybe like in conjunction with what we've. Well, with your work as a composer as well, or just as a person, what does well-being mean to you? Well-being.
That's a lovely question. Well-being. Well-being. I suppose it means. It means. I suppose maybe seeing yourself a little bit objectively. So knowing when to take care of yourself, but knowing also when to take risks. Understanding yourself not as just being trying to see yourself as not just thrown into a situation with all these conflicting impulses, from your own addictions and impulses and hopes and fears and jealousies and panic, but also from your ideological panic and the material, the cost of living, in the hell for many people that is like capitalism, and trying in some way to understand yourself as a location, sometimes to understand yourself as something that isn't you, if that makes sense, and that you can care for that thing and make sure, look after that thing, and also help it take risks, when it's full of fear, and keep things constantly expanding and constantly becoming new. I think that would be.
Makes me think of like sounds like it's a very kind of mindful thing to say. This idea of like,
is it cool? Is that what mindfulness is? Like the idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Sort of, it's almost like you're, or even just this idea. I don't want to kind of appropriate, sort of Eastern ideas that I'm not necessarily too familiar with, but just in mindfulness, like Eckhart Tolle, he kind of talks about the idea of kind of being in your body and, feeling, and just this idea of like, that even sort of fictitiously, that you're like, you're not your ego, or that you're, to sort of be objective and to kind of be like, I'm taking care of this being, that I'm in the head of. Does that make sense? That makes sense. Not to just attach your, like, I mean, capitalism, I think, to go back to that, sort of does that as well, this idea that, that, like, it's the, almost what we're talking about is almost the antithesis of being, like, materialistic, that I am the car that I drive, or the things that I own, but just sort of, having a kind of objectivity. I don't know. You did it better than I did. I'm totally with you on that.
No, I totally. It's also in the becoming. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing more powerful than that, is there? Than the becoming, the kind of working out what you are and finding out that it's actually nothing at all. But it is something still very powerful, because it's the process that connects it all together. And the most important thing is the future, is you know, what could happen, the unlimited potential of the future. That's my favorite quote. I think it's from I'm sure loads of people have said, I think it's from, I can't even remember. I can't even, I think it's from Quentin Mezu. I don't know. But everything is always possible. You know, everything, anything at any particular time, anything. And we get the thing that I think that, you know, that late capitalist culture teaches you is, or that we all actually, it doesn't just teach us it, we believe it in our bones. It's maybe the most fundamental core of everything that we are, is that things, is this idea of realism, that things are the way they are and they can never change, and that there's that kind of, but that's just, you know, that's just an illusion. You know, the history is full of radical breaks and cataclysms, when things shifted entirely and became remade and became new. You know, it's how the universe operates on a very, is through, you know, the fact that anything can happen at any moment. And that's, you know, the most powerful, the most powerful and freeing thing, is that there's always the potential for anything to happen. And that, that, which always makes me feel better.
It's wonderful perspective to have, I think. So so we'll finish there, and then we're going to play a piece called The Moth Aria from Where, composed by the good self. Tell us a bit about what we're going to listen to now.
Oh, well, that's actually a very nice tie-in. I didn't mean that, but the Where is an opera about the end of the world. But the idea is that what would happen in a world where time machines were commercially available, and it's not that, you know, it wouldn't be like, you know, in the recent Star Trek reboot where there was just a new timeline created, you know, just new offshoot, like a little branch. Rather, it would just be like constant erasure and these things folding into each other, and it would create, you know, complete lack. And I thought that was a really good metaphor for, you know, what happens in the complexities of modern society, when so many, you know, when there's such a glut of information that we become overwhelmed and unable to, you know, create really ourselves, and that affects how we, you know, how we understand time. We can't make, you know, these we can't, I think, how do I explain this? Like the fact that we can't organize the information into stable, you know, linear structures. A causal relation to the breakdown of how we perceive time, and also that's related to material conditions, and the fact that we no longer make a dress, but rather we're on a production line, in which case we do one part of the dress, and we do it from the hours of 9 to 12, and then between 12 and 1 we have a break, and then from 1 to 5. And so we think of time also not as these lines of, you know, but rather as blocks, these spatial blocks. And this is to me, well, it seemed to me like a very good metaphor for, you know, the contemporary subjectivity. And in the opera, it's just, you know, it's two people hanging out as this process happens around them, and at the very end, just after the final cataclysm, when everybody is transformed essentially into an object, into mannequins, they just become their object. The people become the objects that they are defined by. But at the end, there is this kind of, it's not so much of a, it's like a kind of a coda almost. I suppose it's the finale, really. But where the writer, who's been the witness to the events, manages to positively reinterpret what has happened according to, you know, according to her own, according to the strength of her own wager. She bets upon reassembling piecemeal parts of the universe into her own narrative, based upon a simple memory that she has with her friend. And the broken parts of the universe are threaded together again by her, through her, you know, her subjectivity, which is this bet upon, you know, it being this way. So it's not, again, it's not trying to, I'm not trying to say, it's not trying to be this subjectivism or not trying to be this kind of postmodernist assemblage, but rather somewhere between the two, that there's, that you can create these, by working along lines of logic that even though they're invented by perhaps, you know, the subject by yourself, is still a form of integrity that gives them, you know, an objectivity.
Okay. Oh, you're cutting out a bit.
Sorry. That's right. Well, yeah, and better. Also, yeah. What is it? What's the old quote about dancing about architecture? Better just to listen to the tune.
Brilliant. Oh no, but it's interesting to hear you talk about it as well. And I always think good to have a context. Alistair, so I'll definitely be bringing you on the show again and again. So look forward to that.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim. It's been a real pleasure. Sorry if I've wittered on.
No, it's brilliant.
But it's been lovely to speak about this, and lovely to speak to you. And I very much look forward to coming back and talking about maybe what we can talk about opera or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Awesome, wonderful.
From caterpillar to hawk moth, hounds and pale scarlet wings, pink tinged dust brown, the terrifying cloth, stretched like Your eyes fix the lens like a pen. Like a pen pushed wings to carved Latin names, winding away time like a gun, like a still bodies saved from change. Change is the mark of a dance. Caught in caval-like foam, casting rainbows on ships' prows. The death's head green, motionless, through that lens you looked and saw, and changed. A caterpillar in a clear glass pane, and from memory's mosaics pieced together.
That was brilliant. Great. So, yeah, that's it for that. I'm now just to finish, so I think we've sort of reaching the end. I'm going to play, just some other music that fits. Going to play some David Lang, a composer, friend. No, it's not a friend of mine, I wish. A composer, American composer that I really like. And this is a piece called I Lie. Okay. Brilliant. And so now we're going to play some Vaughan Williams. And we're going to play, it's, sorry, one moment. Yeah, here we go. Fantasia on a Theme. Thank you. You've been listening to Diversity Radio, a very calming show today on a Tuesday. Yeah, so we'll see you next week.